It was supposed to be just another ordinary morning. The streets were waking up, stretching into life like a slow yawn, as sunlight spilled over the rooftops of a quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped. Lawns were still wet with dew. A few cars rolled by, their drivers sipping coffee and humming to old radio songs. But for one woman, it wasn't just another morning. She was black, she was powerful, and she was being hunted, not by criminals, but by those meant to protect. Captain Alana Davis had been with the FBI for nearly 20 years. She had earned her rank through grit, sacrifice, and a reputation for staying calm when others panicked. On this morning, she was heading to a regional meeting just outside the city, a last-minute request to brief a team of local officers on a federal investigation. She wore a dark blazer and jeans, her FBI credentials clipped to her belt, her badge clearly visible. She wasn't undercover. She wasn't hiding. She had no reason to. Alana was focused, driving along a quiet back road when she noticed the flashing blue lights in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought it had nothing to do with her. Maybe someone ahead had been speeding, but the siren wailed louder, and the cruiser behind her began weaving slightly, signaling her to pull over. Confused, but compliant, Alana slowed and guided, her car to the shoulder. Two officers stepped out of the cruiser, both white, both young. Their hands immediately went to their holsters as they approached. She watched them closely through her side mirror and tried to wave politely. She assumed they'd recognize the badge, ask a few questions, and move on. But something in their walk, their faces, told a different story. Their eyes weren't curious. They were hard, suspicious. One had his hand already wrapped around his gun. Before she could even roll the window all the way down, one officer barked at her to put both hands on the wheel. "Do it now," he shouted. His voice was sharp, accusing. His partner circled the car, hand on his hip. "Is there a problem, officers?" she asked calmly, voice steady. "You match a description," the taller one snapped. "Step out of the car." "My badge is right here on my belt," she replied. "I'm with the Bureau, Captain Alana Davis, FBI. Don't move." The other officer shouted, now pulling out his weapon. Alana sat still, hands raised, pulse pounding in her neck. She'd trained for moments like this, high tension, fast decisions, but never imagined it would happen to her. Not like this. Not because of her skin color. Within seconds, the taller officer yanked open her door and ordered her out at gunpoint. She tried to remain composed, speaking firmly, clearly, stating her name again, her position. But they weren't listening. She was thrown against the car, handcuffed on the side of a road she had driven dozens of times before. Her badge fell to the ground. One of the officers kicked it aside, and in that moment, disrespected, restrained, her authority ignored, Alana didn't feel like a top-ranking FBI captain. She felt small. She felt erased. People began to slow down in their cars, staring, confused. Some took out their phones. A few shouted from windows. One driver honked in protest. But the officers didn't flinch. They kept shouting orders, twisting. Her wrists behind her back, talking over her every attempt to explain. Back at the precinct, it was a different world. Fluorescent lights buzzed above gray walls. A few officers shared coffee and laughs, unaware of what was unfolding out on the road. But it wouldn't be long, because someone had already made a call. A phone had rung. A name had been mentioned. Alana Davis. And in a federal building less than 30 minutes away, a supervisor dropped his coffee when he heard. Not because of what happened, but because of who it happened to. As word spread through official channels, panic began to brew. The officers had no idea. No idea who they had cuffed. No idea what the consequences would be. And while this unfolded across the city, in a crowded bus, something entirely different, but just as life-changing, was happening. 17-year-old Jaden Coleman stood at the back of the bus, earbuds in, backpack slung over one shoulder. He had just gotten off a late shift at the grocery store. His body ached, and all he wanted was to get home and crash. But then, he saw her, a pregnant woman had boarded the bus holding onto a metal pole. her belly obvious beneath her coat. She looked tired, maybe more than tired, worn. Every seat was taken, nobody moved. Without hesitation, Jaden stood up. "Ma'am, you can have my seat," he said quietly. She looked surprised, a little hesitant, but then smiled and with effort, eased herself into the seat. "Thank you, young man," she whispered. He nodded, leaned against the side rail, and put his earbuds back in. He didn't think much of it. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. It just felt right. But a few stops later, as she prepared to leave, she reached into her purse, pulled out a small envelope, and placed it in his hand. "I want you to open this when you get home," she said softly. "And thank you again." Jaden raised an eyebrow. Sure." He watched her step off the bus and disappear into the street. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, but he tucked it into his bag and thought no more of it. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that this woman wasn't just any passenger. And that envelope? It would hold something that would shift the course of his entire future. Back on the roadside, Captain Davis was finally being uncuffed, but not by the same officers who had restrained her. A black SUV had pulled up minutes ago. Doors flew open. Federal agents in dark suits stormed out. The local officers' faces went pale as realization struck them like a train. The man in charge walked up, stone-faced, looked straight at the arresting officer, and said one word: "Uncuff." The younger cop stumbled over his words, trying to explain, trying to backpedal, but it was too late. Captain Alana Davis didn't scream. She didn't curse. She stood tall, dusted herself off, and locked eyes with the men who'd tried to reduce her to nothing more than a suspect. Her silence said everything. She didn't have to raise her voice. Her badge would speak loud enough, and yet the story wasn't over. Not even close. Because what happened that day would ignite something bigger. An internal investigation, national attention, and consequences far beyond anything those officers could imagine. And while they scrambled to protect their careers, Jaden Coleman sat on his bed later that night, staring at the envelope in his hand. Slowly, he opened it. Inside, there was a folded piece of paper and a business card. The card read, "Dr. Elizabeth Monroe, Executive Director, Future Scholars Foundation." The note was handwritten. "Dear Jaden, most people don't notice when someone's struggling, but you did. You saw me. That matters more than you know. I've been watching you these past few weeks on this bus, how you help others, how you carry yourself with quiet grace. I run a full-ride scholarship program for kids exactly like you. Consider this your first step. Let's talk. With gratitude, Elizabeth." Jaden's hands trembled. His eyes scanned the words over and over. His heart thudded against his ribs. He had no idea that one small act, offering his seat, was the beginning of a life he never thought was possible. And on the other side of town, as Captain Davis looked out the window of her unmarked vehicle, staring at the officers being quietly led away for questioning, she couldn't help but wonder how many others like her had been silenced, mistreated, ignored. How many more had stories the world never got to hear, but this time people were listening. This time, the story would be told, and it was only just beginning. Alana sat quietly in the back seat of the black SUV, her fingers pressed against her temple. Her phone buzzed in her lap. Texts from fellow agents, higher-ups, and even a few reporters who somehow caught wind of what had happened. She didn't answer any of them. Her mind was somewhere else, trapped in the moment the officer yanked open her car door, yelling like she wasn't a human being, like she didn't matter. She had spent her whole life proving people wrong. From the moment she stepped into the academy, she had been underestimated, first as a woman, then as a black woman. Later, even as a leader, some people still treated her like a trainee. But nothing, not even the worst parts of the job, had prepared her for being thrown against her own car, accused, threatened, humiliated in broad daylight, in front of strangers, with a badge hanging from her belt. Her driver, special agent. Ramirez didn't say a word. He had worked under her for 3 years and knew when to keep quiet. But even he kept glancing in the mirror, his eyes full of silent rage. He had been the first to get the call, and when he pulled up to the scene and saw her in cuffs, saw the gun still half raised, it took everything in him not to explode. Alana finally spoke, her voice low. "Did you get their names?" Ramirez nodded. "They'll be in the report. Internal Affairs is already on it." She turned her head slightly, watching the landscape pass. "This is deeper than names. It always is." Meanwhile, back at the local precinct, the two officers, Dolan and Miller, sat in a small office, both pale, both sweating. Their supervisor, Lieutenant Harris, was pacing. He had known this would blow up, but not like this. Not FBI level. Not someone with clearance that high. "She didn't say who she was," Officer Dolan kept repeating. "We had a report. A car like hers was linked to a suspect. That's what dispatch said." "And you didn't verify," Harris snapped. "She showed you her badge," Miller spoke up, his voice shaky. "We thought it might be fake. That happens. We were following protocol." But even as they spoke, they could hear it. The footsteps down the hall, the whispering, the doors opening and closing harder than usual. People were talking. They all knew. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a scandal. A racial incident. Involving a top federal agent. Someone would lose their badge over it. Maybe more. Outside that tension-filled building, Jaden Coleman sat on his narrow twin bed, the envelope still in his lap. He hadn't moved for several minutes. The house around him was quiet. His mother was working a double shift at the hospital, and his younger sister had fallen asleep watching cartoons in the next room. Jaden could still hear the hum of the bus in his ears, still see the woman's kind eyes as she pressed the envelope into his hand. He looked at the card again. Future Scholars Foundation. He had never heard of it. He opened the note once more, reading it slowly this time. Every word felt surreal. She said she'd been watching him on the bus. Was that even real? And she said she ran a scholarship program, not just any program, a full ride. Jaden had dreamed about college, but that's all it ever was, a dream. He worked nights at the grocery store to help his mom pay bills. His grades were decent, but he didn't have the time or money for tutoring, SAT prep, or fancy extracurriculars. College always felt like something meant for kids who didn't have to carry the weight he carried. But here was this note, this card, from a stranger who had seen something in him. He didn't know it yet, but that one act of kindness would place him in rooms he never imagined, facing choices and challenges that would test him in ways no one could see coming. And still, far from Jaden's quiet home and away from the whispers at the precinct, the story was growing in the shadows. News hadn't broken yet, but when it did, the city would shake. Already a few government officials were on high alert. Alana's name held weight, and what happened to her, on the side of a road with a gun aimed at her chest, was not something that could be buried or brushed aside. But not everyone wanted the truth out. Somewhere deep in a government office, an older man in a navy blue suit sat watching a grainy dashcam video in silence. He paused the footage on the frame that showed Alana's hands in the air, her face turned toward the officers. The look in her eyes, part disbelief, part fury, was unmistakable. The man leaned back in his chair and sighed. "We have a problem." Woman across from him nodded. They had no idea who she was. That's the worst part. If they'd known, maybe they would have acted different. But they didn't care. Not about her badge. Not about anything. He rubbed his temples. "This goes public. We're in for a storm." She tilted her head. "It's already public, in her world. Word spreading inside the bureau. Agents are talking. Quiet now. But it won't stay quiet." He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the Capitol. "Find out if she's talking to anyone. Press, legal, anyone. I want to know who she's meeting with, where she's going. And if she's not talking, she will, sooner or later." Back in her apartment, Alana sat in the dark, staring at an old framed photo, her father in uniform, hand on her shoulder, the two of them beaming after her first day in the academy. He had been her hero. A decorated officer. He used to say, "Wear the badge right and let it mean something." She wondered what he would say if he saw her now. Manhandled, disrespected by men half her rank, half her experience. Would he tell her to report it? or to let it go, like so many had before. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from the Bureau's press team. "We need to prepare a statement. Call when ready." She tossed the phone onto the couch. A statement wouldn't fix this. It wouldn't erase what happened, wouldn't change the fact that even with power, even with rank, she wasn't safe from the judgment that came just from the color of her skin. And she was tired. Tired of playing nice. Tired of staying quiet. But she wasn't broken, not yet. She turned the TV on, hoping to distract herself. Local news flashed across the screen. Crime updates, a feel-good story about a lost dog, weather reports, and then, just before a commercial, a strange coincidence, a clip about a scholarship foundation, future scholars, an anonymous donor program for students of color in underserved neighborhoods, and a quick photo. The woman from the bus Jaden's seat gesture had just become part of a feel-good story too, one about kindness, unity, and unexpected opportunity. But the camera didn't follow him home. It didn't show him pacing the floor, wondering if it was all real. It didn't show the confusion in his eyes, the weight he suddenly felt, that maybe he mattered more than the world had told him. And as both stories moved forward, one of injustice and power, one of kindness and chance, they were already pulling closer together, on a path that neither Alana nor Jaden could see coming. But something was brewing, something big, and no one was ready for what would come next. Jaden woke up the next morning to a different kind of silence. It wasn't the usual quiet of a tired house or a neighborhood just starting to stir. It was the silence that comes before something changes, when the air feels heavy, even though nothing seems out of place. The envelope from the woman was still, by his bedside, untouched since last night. Part of him still couldn't believe it. Was it real? He hadn't told his mom yet, didn't want to get her hopes up. He'd seen it too many times. People come around offering help, making promises, only to disappear when it really mattered. But something about the woman on the bus felt different. Her eyes had held something steady. And that card, that program, the website was real. He had looked it up before falling asleep. Not only was it legit, but it had already funded over 50 students. Most of them looked like him. He got ready for school, still thinking about her. He didn't know it yet, but the seat he gave up that day, just a small act of kindness, was already stirring conversations in rooms far beyond his reach. At a conference table miles away, the same woman, Mrs. Evelyn Warren, was on a Zoom call with her team. Her voice was calm, but there was something sharp behind it. "Find the boy," she said. "I want to meet him properly. No cameras, no PR, just him and his mother, if she's willing." Someone on the call asked, "You sure about this? There'll be questions. Some might say it looks targeted." Evelyn didn't blink. "Let them talk. I saw something in him. You don't walk past that." Her assistant nodded. "We'll reach out discreetly." Meanwhile, back at the precinct, a different kind of meeting was taking place. This one wasn't on Zoom. It was face-to-face. Quiet voices, closed doors. Lieutenant Harris sat across from two men in suits. Internal affairs. "We're not just here to investigate the incident," one of them said. "We're also reviewing patterns. Officer Dolan has had 3 previous complaints. Officer Miller, 2. All involving excessive force or verbal escalation." Harris shifted uncomfortably. None of them stuck. "That's not the same as being innocent," the other replied. "This time's different. You don't rough up an FBI captain without the whole system taking notice." There was a pause, then Harris leaned in, lowering his voice. "They didn't know who she was, that's the truth. They saw her skin before they saw her badge." The men in suits didn't say anything, but they both wrote something down. "Across town." Alana sat in a quiet diner sipping black coffee. She hadn't touched the food in